Hello everyone! I thought I wouldn't have enough time to do another video today, but as it turns out, I finished my work earlier. So I decided to show you the game. It's a clash of superpowers actually. World number 2 against world number 3, Aronian versus Mamedyarov. And it's quite a game. It was played in round 6 of the European Team Chess Championship. And I'm not showing you this game because of how well Aronian won it. I'm showing you because how great Mamedyarov lost. But you'll see what I mean. Mamedyarov definitely decided to give us an interesting game to check out. So 11 has the white pieces and he plays c4. We have c5, so the English opening, knight to f3, knight to c6, knight to c3, g6, g3, bishop to g7, bishop to g2, again the ultra-symmetrical variation, d6, 11 castles, e6, e3, knight to g2, e7, d4, Mamedyarov castles, rook to e1, knight to f5 now, and d5. E captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and knight f to e7. Knight to h4, knight to e5 now, queen to c2, knight captures on d5, bishop captures on d5, and bishop to e6. And this is where the game really starts. By playing bishop to e6, Mamedyarov kind of seems to have dropped this b7 pawn. But you'll see that this pawn is extremely poisonous, and if 11 captured it. For example, bishop captures on b7, rook to b8, bishop to d5 now, g5, forcing the knight back, and if knight to f5, then bishop captures on d5, and after c captures on d5, knight to f3, winning the exchange here. And in this position, after g5, if the knight goes to f3, if the knight goes to f3, then bishop captures on d5, knight captures on e5, and bishop to b7. The knight is still attacked, and after a move like knight to d3, queen to f6, and it would be very hard for white to play this. White doesn't have a light squared bishop. This is the strongest piece in the game. The queen is threatening to come to f3. The light squares are terrible here. So as it seems, after this bishop to e6 move, this pawn is indeed poisonous. So Levin, of course, doesn't capture the pawn. He plays rook to d1. We have queen to d7, now protecting the b7 pawn, and rook to b1. And this is where the game gets really interesting. Probably rook to e8, and the black can simply continue playing this, even with a move like bishop captures on d5, c captures on d5, and bishop to f6, forcing this knight to decide where it's gonna go. It can't go to f3. You don't really want to allow this bishop to capture the knight, opening up the white king, so there's really not a lot of moves a white can play here. If you play knight to g2, then knight to f3 check, of course, is very unpleasant for white. So probably a move like f4 would have to be played, and already you can see that white's king is definitely feeling the draft. So after rook to b1, Mamedyarov decided not to go for any of this, and he played a most interesting move. He played b5. And this is interesting because, well, we're usually used to Aronian being the one that gives up the exchange sacrifice, as you probably remember his games against Anish Giri and Magnus Carlsen, where he totally annihilated them with an early exchange sacrifice. So what's the best move here? Well, probably to capture the rook, which Aronian did. My suspicious engine is suggesting c captures on b5, but okay. A human would definitely capture the rook. So bishop captures on a8, rook captures on a8, and f4. Knight captures on c4, and Mamedyarov is down the exchange, but he does have a beautiful bishop pair. This pawn chain is very strong. The knight on c4 is very strong. Definitely the compensation is there. b3, kicking the knight away with tempo, and preparing bishop to b2 to exchange the strong dark square bishop on g7. Knight to b6, bishop to b2, and bishop captures on b2. Rook captures and rook to e8. E4, And here Aronian is threatening f5, and if Mamedyarov played a move like bishop to g4 with a tempo on the rook, for example rook to e1 and now queen to c6, pressuring the e4 pawn, moves like c4 are in the air. If this e4 pawn ever lunges forward, this long diagonal is open, the knight is ready to jump into the game. This would have been at least equal for black. But after e4, Mamedyarov didn't go for bishop to g4. He played queen to c6, and he gave Levon the upper hand. And of course, Levon immediately seized it with f5. Bishop to c8, now queen to d3, attacking the d6 pawn, and Mamedyarov responds with c4. Aronian, of course, continues with the best move. Queen captures on b6, queen captures on e4 now, and rook to f2, not allowing this pawn to be captured, and well, preparing rook d to f1 if needed. For example, if Mamedyarov decided to go for a bold move like c3, this might have been an option, but after something like f captures and f captures rook d to f1, White's rooks on the f file are looking very nice here. So he decided not to go for something like this. After rook to f2, g captures on f5 was played, and now knight to g2. Queen to e5, Mamedyarov is now up 2 pawns, and he would like to exchange queens, but Aronian refuses this. Queen to h6. Although accepting the queen trade would also be in White's favor, but queen to h6 is a better move. The black king is definitely feeling the draft. White trade queens. Queen to e6, again offering a trade of queens. Queen to g5 with check. Queen to g6, again offering the trade. Queen to h4, and now king to g7. Knight to f4, now with a tempo on the queen. Queen to g4, offering a trade of queens. And knight to h5 with check. King to h7, king to h6, and only now that Levon feels that it's definitely in his favor, he does trade queens. Queen captures on g4, f captures on g4, and now knight to f6. Rook to e5, b captures on c4, b captures on c4. Mamedyarov does have a passed pawn now, but it will be very hard for him to find the time to actually push it. Rook to f4, rook to e2. Trying to cut off the king from coming into the game, and also pressuring the a2 pawn and the h2 pawn if the king moves. Knight to g4 with check, king to g7, and now knight to f6. The rook is guarding the knight on f6. Levon is preparing rook d8 and rook g8. Rook to e5 now. Rook to d8 by Aronian, and bishop to f5. And this bishop to f5 was a must move. Because if you play a bold move like c3 here, you're getting checkmated with rook to g8 check, king to h6, and rook to h4 with check. You have to block this check, rook to h5, and rook captures on h5. This is checkmate. So unfortunately, Mamedyarov doesn't have time to push the pawn. So rook d8 and the bishop to f5. Now the rook is no longer protecting the knight, but Levon finds a beautiful continuation. Knight to h5 with check, king to h6, and now rook to g8. And the knight, of course, can't be captured. If you capture the knight, you get rook to h4 checkmate. So after rook to g8, bishop to g6. And here knight to f6 by Aronian, rook to e1 with check, king to f2. We have rook to a1. And here we have a Levon signature move, which ends the game h4. And in this position, Mamedyarov resigned the game because both of them know what's going to happen next. Just to give you an example, Mamedyarov can prolong this game for a couple of moves, but after something like rook captures, king to f3, rook a3 check, king g2, rook a2 check, king h3, there are no more checks now. Now rook to a5. Rook to f3, now not allowing any rook to a3 checks after this pawn goes to g4. C3, now g4, and well, this black king can't move. What's going to happen next is that this pawn is going to g5 with check, and Mamedyarov will have to give up this rook for the pawn. So c2, for example, rook will guard the promotion square. queen comes into the game, rook captures, and now after a couple of checks, rook checks, king h2, rook checks, king g1, rook will have to go to a5, and it's all over. g5 with check, the king has nowhere to go. The rook must be sacrificed. Rook captures, pawn captures on g5 with check. The king has to capture, and now knight captures on h7. He even loses another pawn. The bishop is pinned. He cannot capture the knight. It's all over. But it's very nice that Levin ended this game with his signature move, that is h4. Although in his games he usually plays it much sooner. But nevertheless. So yeah, I really enjoyed this game, and I really enjoyed that idea by Mamedyarov, that b5 idea, sacrificing the exchange for the strong bishop pair and that very nice pawn chain. And if he continued with that bishop to g4 move, he probably could have played this game to some advantage. And I'm interested, is this b5 idea home preparation, or was it just some great inspiration over the board, which would be very interesting, because it's a team match. You're not just playing for yourself. And it was a big game for Mamedyarov, as he's playing world number 2 Levin Aronian. So I guess he probably wanted to prove something, and it backfired, unfortunately. But like I said, I showed this game because of how well Mamedyarov lost the game. So yeah, I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.